chapter 13, verses 6 through 9. He also spoke this parable. A certain man had a fig tree planted in his vineyard, and he came seeking fruit on it and found none. And then he said to the keeper of his vineyard, "Look, for 3 years I have come seeking fruit on this fig tree and find none. Cut it down. Why does it use up the ground?" But he answered and said to him, "Sir, let it alone this year until I dig around it and fertilize it. And if it bears fruit, well, but if not, after that you can cut it down."
Thank you, Sean. Oops. There are a lot of metaphors in the scripture. The main metaphor seems to be get my hand out of my pocket. Why?
Because you always turn off your microphone when you hit the wire. There was no sound.
Okay. I stand corrected. It's a good thing I have you to help me. Okay, should I put my hands behind my back or in the front?
I'm not the only one that's saying this. Raise hands.
I'll do the best I can. How's that sound? Which may not be good enough for some of you. The main metaphor is the shepherd and the sheep. But there are other metaphors in the scriptures, and this metaphor is the husbandman or the vine dresser and the vineyard. And this is quite a large metaphor in the Old Testament, and so I want to show you a couple of things. But before I do that, I just want to mention that Jesus seems to have a photographic memory. I don't know how he recalled all the things that he recalled, but he knew that Old Testament, Genesis through Malachi. He knew it backwards and forwards. He knew everything about it. And a lot of his teaching, really most of his teaching, comes out of the Old Testament. And there are not too many original things with Jesus, but they're all found in the Old Testament. His interpretations of some of the things are different than what the rabbis taught. And so he basically was a person who corrected the Jewish leaders in their understanding of the Old Testament. And the metaphor of the fig tree and the metaphor of the vineyard, it goes way back to the beginning. Now you remember, this is really not part of the sermon today. See, I didn't touch a thing and it's still... No extra charge for this, but the first time we find the fig tree is in Genesis. And that's after the people sinned and they covered themselves with fig leaves. And God said, no, that's not good enough. And he made them animal skins. He made them leather clothing. That doesn't have anything to do, I just want to mention that as the first time that we found figs. Now, when I was a kid, my grandmother used to offer me fig Newtons. You love them? No, Pastor Philip was here one year, and we went out, and he said, "I don't want any tomato in my salad." I said, "Why not?" He said, "The tomatoes here are terrible." And I said, "But it's August. The tomatoes this time of year are really good." And so he had a tomato, and he said, "Yeah, this is like an Indian tomato." I don't like bananas. And I didn't like pineapple. The reason I didn't like pineapple is because Mom got it in a can with a hole in the pineapple, and then she would throw it on our plate when we had pork chops or something like that, and it just was terrible. And then I went to Africa and had a Ugandan pineapple, and I'll tell you, we can get good pineapples now at Wegmans, but they're even so, they're still not as good as the ones they pick right off the bush in Africa. Absolutely the most delicious fruit that you can think of. The same thing's true of bananas. I don't like bananas. But they brought me a banana in India. And in India, there's not much you can eat. You have to, if you're going to eat something, you better be sure you can peel it. So I peeled it, and I ate that fresh banana off the bush, and it was just as delicious as anything. And I was never been able to eat one since I came back because they're just not the same. They're not ripe and fresh. And I believe the same thing is probably true of figs, because every time you look up at it, they're said to be the most sweet fruit that you could possibly eat. Now, they do have a lot of seeds in them, as you probably know from the fig Newtons. They're kind of grainy to eat. So here's the metaphor of the fig tree, and the metaphor of the fig tree also, it's the metaphor of the vineyard as well. So let's take a look at the Old Testament and see where Jesus got this teaching from, and then I'll interpret the teaching for you a little bit. I really like this ability to move this from here. God's vineyard. This is from the prophet Isaiah, the 8th century BC. So we're going back a long time from the time of Jesus. In a time where God is speaking to the people of Israel, and he's saying that you're not living up to the standard to which you could possibly live up. You're not being a good Jew. You're not following the rules. You're not loving people like you should be. And so this is a song which God gave to Isaiah to write down. Let me sing for my beloved my love song concerning his vineyard. My beloved had a vineyard on a very fertile hill. He dug it, cleared it of stones, and planted it with choice vines. He built a watchtower in the midst of it. He hewed out a wine vat. He expected it to yield grapes, but it yielded wild grapes. Now the inhabitants of Jerusalem, the people of Judah, judge between me and my vineyard. For the vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel, and the men of Judah his delightful plant. He looked for justice, but behold, bloodshed. For righteousness, but behold, a cry of distress. So, Isaiah hears from God. God says, I've planted this vineyard. The people of God are the inhabitants of the vineyard. I expected there to be people loving each other and take care of each other. And it goes on and it talks about a lot of different societal sins. It talks about landlords that buy all the property that they can around so that they artificially raise the rents and impoverish the people. And it goes on, it gives quite a bit of criticism about what was going on in those times. But the point I want to mention is that Israel is the vineyard of God. And so that's the basis of what I want to talk about. Now, I have a picture, and I'm not sure how it's going to show up here, but following is a actual picture of a vineyard in Israel. Let me see what that looks like. Okay, that's not too bad. Let me just move this ahead one. Here we have, let's see, how does this thing work? Here, it's hard to see, but here we have the fig tree. Here we have the fig tree. Here we have two fig trees. Here we have a young fig tree. And we have a tower and a house. And these stones were all picked off the vineyard. You think you got a lot of stones in your garden? So there was enough rocks here on this terraced hillside to make houses and walls and to plant these trees. These are the vines. They're not like our vines that are planted exactly in the same distance apart. But there's the person that tends this vineyard is the person who we're talking about today. We're talking about these figs that Jesus is speaking of. So, if Israel's a vineyard, and if there are people who take care of the vineyard in Israel, then the church is also the vineyard, and there are people who take care of the church on behalf of the owner of the vineyard. tempted to say next slide, but I've got it right here. Here it is again. Let me sing for my beloved a love song concerning his vineyard. My beloved had a vineyard on a very fertile hill. He dug it, cleared it of stones, planted it with choice vines, built a watchtower in the midst, hewed out a wine vat, expected it to yield grapes, but it produced wild grapes. Now, if you go, I don't know if any of you are out in the wilderness at all, but when I was a kid, we used to go in the woods in different places, and we would see these vines with these little teeny grapes on it. And of course, if you're like me, you tried them. How many tried the little sour grapes? Not very good for eating, are they? I'm sure they do. Now we have seedless grapes. Sean buys those California grapes, and they come in their great big plump things like this. And I don't know what they did to those, but those have been improved upon by humans. He's expecting good grapes. And what are good grapes for? Wine, of course. You know, the Bible, I may sound like a heretic for saying this, but the Bible presents wine as a good thing. It presents drunkenness as a bad thing, but wine is a good thing. And there are very, very low occurrences of alcoholism among Jewish people, because they don't drink wine just to get drunk. They'd have a glass of wine with their meal. And so that even the kids, even when they're little in Passover, there's 4 glasses of wine. And so they learn how to use alcohol responsibly. And wine is, that's what you do at a wedding. That's what you do when you have friends over. It brings about happiness and so forth. But of course, drunkenness brings about unhappiness and a lot of other problems and poverty and other things. But wine is said to be a good thing. The vineyard of God should produce wine. But in this case, it produced bitterness. It produced people taking advantage of other people. And I mentioned all of the things that follow in this particular passage. Now, back to our scripture in Luke. He told this parable. A man had a fig tree planted in his vineyard, and he came looking for fruit and found none. Now this is the precursor to the story. Eventually, not too long after this, Jesus goes into Jerusalem and he sees a fig tree, and it doesn't have any fruit on it, and he curses it. Now, a lot of people have a problem with this. Why would Jesus curse a perfectly good tree? Well, the reason he cursed it was because it didn't have any fruit. But one of the gospel authors tells us, but it wasn't the season for figs. So obviously, we're supposed to think about this and try to figure out what's going on. But prior to Jesus doing that, he tells this parable about a man who has a fig tree that has no fruit upon it. Now here we have a map of Israel and Judah. And see this right here, this green part? What are we calling that today? Gaza. See, there's the city of Gaza right there. And the Philistines are now called the Palestines, because the Philistines lived there from the beginning. This is at no extra charge, too. I'll get back to that. I just want to make a mention about current events. The Philistines have always lived there. And if you read Kings and Chronicles, you can see that they have always done the atrocities for 3,000 years that they did in October. And the Israelites, see, I'm not doing anything and it's still cutting out. The Philistines and the Israelites have fought throughout history. And the Philistines have come in and done stuff even worse than what was done in October of last year. And those of you who were here when we went through 1st and 2nd Samuel last year and the year before, they were constantly doing this kind of stuff. Now today they're saying will be free. Well, what they're saying is they want to eradicate the Jews who lived in Judea. You think Judea maybe possibly refers to Judea and Israel, the other name of the other tribes, and they had from Beersheba, which was the southern part, to Dan, which is the northern part. And so it says in first, during Solomon's lifetime, which was about 970 to 931 BC, Judah and Israel lived in safety from Dan to Beersheba, and all of them under their vines and their fig trees. Vines and fig trees are a metaphor for peace and prosperity in the Bible. So that's kind of a basic point. So when Jesus tells this parable, he says, a man had a fig tree and he planted it in his vineyard and he came looking for fruit and he found none. Jesus said, inspect the fruit. You don't gather figs from thorns. Look not at what people say. They can say they're a Christian, but if they're doing things that have no good fruit, then they're probably not really a true Christian. What are you trying to do? No, we'll work on this later, Tilly. We'll do the best we can today. So, under the vine and under the fig tree is a metaphor for shalom, and shalom means peace and prosperity, and may everything be good and may everything be well. And the name Solomon is the root word for Solomon, the king, is shalom, shalomen in Hebrew. So during his reign, he was living 900 years BC. He was the son of King David. All the nations who were around him brought him taxes, and Israel was the premier nation on earth during that time. And so in order to say it in a way that the people in the vernacular could understand, everybody rested under their vines and under their fig trees. Now, let's talk about another prophet. This is Micah, and he lived before the fall of Israel, which was before 722 BC. This is what he says about the Messiah, about the coming Christ. He shall judge between many people, and shall arbitrate between strong nations far away. That's probably us. They shall beat their swords into plowshares, their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not live up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore, but they will sit under their own vines and under their own fig trees, and no one will make them afraid, for the mouth of the Lord of hosts has spoken. So the ultimate coming, or the second coming of Messiah will be, the Prince of Peace will arrive. There'll be no need for all these war machines. The military-industrial complex will be broke, and taxes will be lower because we don't have to provide all these $39 million fighter jets and stuff like that. And in that day, everybody will be under their vine and fig tree. So you see, this is a major doctrine. Here's another scripture concerning it. This is conversely. He struck their vine and their fig trees and shattered the trees of their country. So when war comes and the trees, you see, there's a couple of things that are the same between vines and fig trees, and that is they must be tended. If you don't prune the vine, you really have to do it every year, don't you, Priscilla? And you leave, three little, that's it. Also, prune the fig tree in order to get fig. In a time of war, let me see if I can do something else here. In a time of war, it's not likely that people are going to be pruning trees. If there are nations overriding in your area, you're probably not going to want to be out in the garden and planting trees. And so in times of trouble, they can just go wild. And if you leave these trees long enough, and these vines long enough, they're going to produce pea-sized bitter fruit. So the garden needs tending. I think I'll make a man and a woman, and I think I will place them in a garden to tend it. I mean, that's what the book of Genesis says the creation was like. And so gardens need tending. And if we are indeed the people of God, the choice vine that are planted within his vineyard, we need tending, which means every year he's got to cut all but 3 off. I think he's going to leave 4 for us. Pruned. We don't like it when things are taken away from us that we like. But if those extra wild things are allowed to grow off of us, then the leaves on the vine will suck all the juice, and they're not going to be able to make the fruit. And then if we don't have the fruit, it can't be put in the wine press, and it can't give joy to everybody around. And so it's necessary in God's vineyard that we receive pruning. I don't know. I don't like it. But I can look back on my life and say the most difficult things that have happened to me in life, and there's been several, looking back, they actually steered me in the right way. And that's an important thing to understand when we're going through these trials sometimes. Zechariah, a later prophet, maybe 500 years BC, he predicts the coming of Messiah. I'm going to bring my servant the branch. You know, there's a church in Naples called the Branch. And, I mean, it's a good biblical name, but I don't think most people understand why it's called the Branch. I don't think most people understand why there's a denomination called the Vineyard. I don't really understand why the church is named Calvary Chapel. You know, all of these things, they're biblical concepts, and I think the people that these congregations, they understand what it means, but I don't think the people at large in the community understand the meaning. But here, God says, my branch is coming, and on a single stone I will engrave this inscription, says the Lord. I will remove the guilt of the land in a single day. On that day, says the Lord, you shall invite each other to come under your vine and under your fig tree. So there are many other scriptures about this too, but it's a major doctrine. And so when Jesus begins to tell the parable of the vineyard to these folks who are walking with him towards Jerusalem on the place where he's going, many of them probably understood where he was coming from. So, a man had a fig tree planted in his vineyard, and he came and looked for fruit and found none. Now, fruit is the most important thing that you can find on a fig tree. But the other thing that is very important, and the reason that fig trees are actually planted in vineyards, is for the shade. It's hot over there. The vines, they grow in the summer, and it's very arid and dry, and somehow those vines are able to take the dew off the soil and turn it into grapes. And so, I mean, everybody drank wine in those days because you had to drink it because they didn't have any water. They would mix the water with the wine so the alcohol in the wine would purify the water and keep them from getting dysentery and stuff like that. And so the shade, did you ever see in an old farm field where they plow by hand in the middle of the field, there's a tree? That's why that tree, so that when it's time for a coffee break from plowing, they can go and they sit under the tree and in the shade and get some comfort. And so Jesus says, a man had a fig tree and planted it in his vineyard, and he came looking for fruit and found none. The man in this parable is God. That's kind of weird, isn't it? The man is God. There's something about that theology in the New Testament, isn't there? And so, who's the owner of the fig tree? Who's the owner of the vineyard? The man is the owner. And he comes and he's expecting that his servants have taken care of the vineyard and that there should be some fruit for him to have. You know, they were like tenant farmers. In Bloomfield, when I was growing up, there was a guy from Pittsford that owned a lot of farms. He would find a farm with a house, and he would buy it, and then these tenant farmers would come, and they had some arrangement where the owner of the property would get some of the produce from the land, and the tenant farmer would get to live in the house and get some of the produce for the land. And he probably had 8 or 10 farms over in the East Bloomfield, West Bloomfield area. And so it's like that here, where the owner is God. He owns the vineyard. You know, he owns this coffee cup. It's like the story I told you a couple weeks ago about Sinatra when he gave his watch away, and his buddy said, "Why did you do that?" And he said, "I'm just renting it. I'm going to pass off the scene. All my stuff's going to go to somebody else." It was a really good attitude to understand that. So the guy shows up and he's not finding any fruit. Not good. He's expecting some. God is expecting something from us. God is expecting something from the church. But sometimes it's not our fault. Sometimes it is. In this case, it wasn't his fault. The gardener, which is called the dresser or the vine keeper in some translations, is the prophet, teacher, pastor, or rabbi. It's his responsibility to make sure that things are trimmed up properly and that some fruit is going to come. And I assume from this parable that perhaps, that this was done. So the owner, that's God, said to the gardener, that's the leader in the vineyard. Of course, there are thousands of leaders in the vineyard, different vineyards. I don't know if you noticed in that picture, but there was about 5 different vineyards shown there with walls around each one. And the owner of each one had to take care of it. And by the way, people say that Jesus was a socialist, but this parable shows that the ownership is a good thing. The owner said to the gardener, "For 3 years I've come looking for fruit. I still find none. Cut it down." It's kind of harsh, don't you think? Years and years ago when we lived in Hopewell, when Daisy was a lot younger than 35, she turned 35 yesterday, but officially she's 29, we had a peach tree. Do you remember the peach tree? You do. It was a useless peach tree. Absolutely useless. And so I was reading this passage at that time, and so I decided that I would try it. And I went out with a shovel in the spring, and I dug all the thing, and I threw a bunch of manure on it, and boy, did we ever get peaches. And then the next winter it got really cold and killed me. But it did produce really nicely when we followed this prescription on how to do it. Let it alone for 1 more year. I'll dig around it and put some manure on it. Hey, I didn't write this. Don't blame me. Some crap on the unfruitful. God dumps some crap on sometimes because that there are nutrients in the crap that will make you produce good stuff. This is the Bible. This is Jesus' teaching. Well, we don't want any crap dumped on us. It says, what did it say in the version you read? You just closed. It didn't even say manure. Fertilizer. You know, the authors who have translated the New Testament, they've taken a lot of things and they've given euphemisms to them to kind of tone them down, but we're talking about crap here. Dump some crap on it. Let it alone till next year. If it bears fruit next year, well, good, but if not, you can cut it down. The guy who's the husbandman says to God, you can cut it down if it doesn't produce next year. Well, what are we to learn from this? I mean, we've talked about the metaphors, and we've talked about the historical understanding of vine and fig tree, and we also see the danger of not producing fruit. But I think the main thing that we're supposed to learn from this is that God is very merciful, and he's willing to give people more chances than the person who he's hired to take care of things is willing to give. He's willing to go the extra year. The vineyard owner, the vineyard tender says cut it down, and or God says cut it down, and the vineyard tender says, well, I'll wait one more year. It says in 2 Peter, the Lord is not slack concerning his promise. He's talking about the second coming. When will Jesus be back? When will the swords be beaten into plowshares? When will the time come when the Messiah will cause the nations to be at peace and not learn war anymore, and everybody in the whole earth gets to sit under their fig tree in their vineyard? When will that happen? Why is God waiting? He's waiting because he's not willing that anybody should perish and everybody should have a chance. When will the Lord return? When the gospel is preached to the whole world, it says. When the good news is preached throughout the earth, then the end will come. Because God is not willing that any should perish. And if you want to perish, he's not going to stop you. You have an opportunity to say no to God, because he is not a maker of robots. We have our free will. We can say yes, we can say no, but God isn't willing that anybody should perish because he's a merciful God. And so there's a little extra time given. Who has something to say about this? Caleb does.
It's my ring hitting it. Two thoughts. One is we can't really think of, like here, we can plant a tree anywhere. All of our soil in the Northeast. There, it really is, you have a property and your soil, you can probably only have 4 fig trees on your property. So it really is a big deal if you have one that's not producing, because you only have 4 on your whole farm. Another thing I thought about is how many years does it take to get a fig tree to be big enough before you can complain that it's not?
Yeah, I thought about looking that up, but I ran out of time.
So it's hard for us to give up on things, especially if we've waited 10 years. That's what I'm going to, if it's like an apple or a peach tree, we normally buy them 5 years old, basically, from Walmart, and then we plant them for 3 years, and then we start getting fruit.
And the rabbits eat them.
But if you've invested, I'm thinking we've investing 10 years on a tree, God investing all his time on us, the gardener investing all that time, you don't want to give up on it. and we keep it's love. We make excuses to try to just give me a little more time with the tree, maybe next year. I've already spent 10 years getting it to grow. I'd much rather keep trying than cut it down. But he acknowledges that there does come a point where cutting your loss, I've wasted 10 years and I'm not getting anything. It's time for me to invest in something that will produce. But with love, you go as long as you can.
Hang in there. Good point. Who else?
I think the message is clear. We will be judged. And God expects something from us now, right? The judgment will be at the end, but during our lifetime, he's looking for fruit from us. And, thinking of the fig tree providing peace and comfort, that's what we're supposed to be doing, right? We're supposed to be the light on the hill, showing God's love and mercy and grace that he gave everybody that we've come to know and accepted. We're supposed to be a reflection of that. So if we're a tree with no fruit, we're not providing any substance to anybody. And if we aren't showing God's love, we aren't helping people. We aren't comforting them. And therefore, we're falling short of what our mission is as servants of God. So I think in this, you did a great job, because it really makes you think about what have you done? What have I done? Have I done enough? And am I doing it? I think sometimes too, when you get older, you look, well, I've done this. But if you still have this far to go, you're supposed to keep growing, because you don't want to be the tree that gets cut down.
I think that's true, but I also think we have to be careful not to think that we're going to get in by works. It's that balance. It's that line of keep trying to be more like Jesus, but knowing we're not going to get in by our works. It's all his.
No, but we will have works
his
based on
doing.
our faith.
Right.
Yeah, there's some other things I wanted to know how long the fig tree lives and stuff like that. I just didn't have time to go there. How long it takes for it to produce. I mean, there's something about planting a tree, especially at my age. I'm thinking about putting some abrevieties in the back, and I'm thinking, is it really worth it at this age? The olive tree is another metaphor in the Bible, and you plant an olive tree, it takes like 150 years to get an olive off of it. So nobody that plants one is ever going to eat anything off of it. So you have to do it, for the future, for your kids. Anyone else? The precursor for where this is going is Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem. And he's sitting on the Mount of Olives on the Passion Week before he goes into Jerusalem and to give his life. And he cries over Jerusalem. He says, "Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, I wanted to gather you as a hen gathers her chicks." By the way, that's a female representation of God. If anybody says God isn't ever referred to as a female, well, it's a hen. And how I wanted to gather you, but you were unwilling. And the next verse says, "Therefore your house has left you desolate." And as we know from history, that Jesus died somewhere around the year 30, and around the year 70, Titus came and completely destroyed the city. And they never had control of that city again, and they never had control of Israel again until 1948. But there's plenty of scriptures that prophesy that happening as well. So that's where this is going. I mean, this is a warning to the nation of Israel, but it's also a personal warning for those of us who are people in the vineyard, as Keith mentioned. Anyone else?